Okay, so we have a presentation for you guys, and I think we're going to get a little interactive, especially at the end. First, we'll do some introductions, and let's just introduce ourselves, if you don't mind. So, my name is Tim Haggerty. I'm the CEO and founder of Teaming Pro. You might have seen us in the foyer there. Happy to talk small business, and thanking everyone for joining us this afternoon. Okay, could we start here with Frank?
Hello, everyone. I'm Frank Spampanato. I guess instead of going through 30 years of my career, I was previously the associate administrator for GCBD, and they asked me to come here, so I figured I'd come and talk with John. But that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, sir. Guys, I'm John Chiraka. I was also Associate Administrator of Government Contracting and Business Development at SBA. Did that for a period of time. Before that, I was a Regional Administrator responsible for the Mid-Atlantic region. Before that, did federal contracting. And I know Frank, he's modest, but he has 30 years of it. I didn't mean to give away your age, but 30 years of very relevant information as a government contracting officer. So
I started young.
Delighted to be here with you.
I started very young.
Awesome. And I should have gone a little bit more in my background. I have about 19 years in federal contracting, big software guy, and created a platform. That's how obsessed we are about business development, helping small businesses. Have spoken to and worked with a lot of small businesses, have won a lot of work, a lot of contracts in my career. And now we focus on the software end of that to help other companies do the same thing.
Help me every day.
There you go. Okay, so I think, John, we're going to go ahead and get started, right?
Sure.
So, kick it off.
And so and Tim mentioned this, right? We sort of want this to be collaborative, right? Discussion. There's going to be a slideshow that we can go through and talk about topics, but it's more about having questions and having a discussion about the current trends and what we hear in the news. How's that really getting implemented? I know we've had different agencies. We've had the SBA itself. There's going to be the legal team that are going to be here tomorrow. But really, what does it mean with respect to the policy getting implemented, and what are some of the trends that are really going to impact the government contracting entities, right? As opposed to, wow, this big policy thing is happening. How does that impact you guys? I think is what we want to try to get to.
Okay.
Skip all over that, I think. That's us.
That's us. Ready for the next?
Yeah. So you guys know all this, right? I think in my mind, and Frank, you were there during some of the COVID response, significant dollars were spent. What we saw initially was sort of a dip, right? We saw a dip, and I'm curious how the audience as new federal contractors or as experienced federal contractors saw this. We saw a little bit of a dip initially, but the COVID spend and the additional spend actually created a lot of volume in the federal space. I don't know what your perspective was inside the government at the time and how that was managed, but for us looking outside in, there was significant spend, and then I think the next slide sort of shows where that spending went. But that created a lot of small business opportunities.
Yeah, the thing I think about when I look at this, and I'm sure you thought the same thing, when you were at the agency, you look at the IT, $5.5 billion, and you think, okay, where was that spent, that $5.5 billion? And I'd like to know what fraction of it went into our systems at SBA, because I mean, we talk about, making the certifications more streamlined and doing things better and cross-cutting systems that can talk to each other. So, if you're HubZone or 8A, but the frustration was, and I'm sure it was for John too, that, the systems were limping along, basically. A lot of masking tape and whatever. And we were doing a lot just to keep them alive. And now you got the SDVs coming on board, and And, WOSB just came on board a while back. So I'd like to see
Some of that go.
a little more of that IT go into SBA because, there's a big job there with all those certifications. And I just talked to a couple of people here. The difficulty they've had becoming certified. And I understand. It's really frustrating. And I had to say, sorry, I'm not there anymore. But, it's frustrating. So that's what that slide made me think of.
How many, just real quick, I guess, how many current federal contractors do we have? How many folks that are interested in becoming federal contractors? Okay. And so I think, so definitely, I think one of the challenges is where the money gets spent, as Frank sort of laid out, right? Where does it get spent? And what agencies have benefited from this? What I think is also unique about this is that the pandemic actually created a lot of opportunities for small business set-asides, right? So we saw, historically, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's been like $110, $120 billion. After the pandemic, it was about $144 billion with the additional spend.
Yeah.
And so it created a good opportunity for small businesses. But where there was a challenge, and I think this is a data question too, where there was a challenge is that it wasn't opportunities for new entrants, right? Because what happened is the government had more money to spend, but they spent it with the firms that they already had a relationship with.
Sure.
What we saw is a shutdown in these type of events and matchmaking and new entrants being able to meet the OSDBUs and so forth. So the spend, at least from our perspective, went significantly to existing contractors with existing relationships. So they were the ones that really benefited from the opportunity. And to a large extent, when we talk about sort of trends, one of the things that I think was during your time, Frank, if I'm not mistaken, is the additional year in the 8A program.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so that I think was an excellent step in recognizing that, look, for a year, the new guys who got into the 8A program or are smaller and in the federal contracting program don't have the opportunity to network, to build those networks and go after federal contracts. How do we address that? And I thought that 8A extension was really, really important.
Yeah, I thought it was important. The frustration I had, and you alluded to it, is, the good thing is small businesses, hub zone businesses, we talk about the proverbial you can't turn an aircraft carrier on a dime. Of course, the small businesses can turn on a dime, right? And through that pandemic were extremely valuable. My frustration was seeing the same firms, 8A, getting the awards. New entrants were coming in, but they're not getting awards. There are people that have been graduated in the 8A program for years, and they're still receiving awards. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't receive awards, but I'm saying, what about these new entrants that, in good faith, go through the program, do a great job, throughout the transitioning? So yeah, that was a frustration.
And based on that too, because this really goes to the numbers, and I love looking at these numbers. Okay, so 2018, we had 84,000 new entrants coming to the market, 2018. 2019, we had 86,000 roughly. 2020, we had 154,000. 2021, so far, we're at 156,000. These are new entrants coming into the market. These are guys that most of them don't have relationships. The vast majority don't have a commercial background either, so they're actually brand new coming in, right? So there's sort of a blockage there.
Are those, Sam, so there's a slide in there that shows a reduction in new entrants receiving contracts.
Receiving contracts goes down.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
Yeah.
You see, because we have more entrants in here, but the underlying reality remains the same. They have to have relationships in order to move the needle forward. And that's one of the reasons why I started my company, is to bridge that gap. I see it as a barrier to entry.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have the relationships, what are you going to do? And the SBA, the best that we can do up to this point says, go beat the streets. And so, you rely on, it's, and I do like to say this, and I won't drone on too long, but it's kind of like dating before the internet, right? It's whoever's in our line of sight or whoever we get referred to. That's how we work BD. That's how we grow our businesses in the federal space.
Yeah.
And so we are one of the last industries to see that kind of innovation. I mean, we will eventually get a lot better, but that's how it is.
Yeah.
And so a lot of competition with that.
Yeah, and we're trying to ramp up certifications. Come on, let's get these people certified, but they're going to be certified, but there's no awards. So, what good has certification done?
So I think that kind of leads into the next
Okay.
set of slides. Well, that's actually the spend, which shows, again, I think, so the challenge, or what Tim just alluded to, was that, look, the spend is going up, the number of entrants is going up, but the number of small firms getting contracts is actually going down. And so when we talk about, well, what does that mean? What does that mean with respect to the administration, and what kind of policies are they putting out? And I know the administrator was here this morning, and she talked a little bit to it. But we'll talk, I think, in the next few slides about the administration's executive orders and how, I think this is, we can talk a little bit about this and then the next slide. I think, having had discussions with both the policymakers sort of at the White House and then on the Hill, and then as well as the agency, and the executive orders that have come out, there's a significant push to sort of cast a broader net, right? There's a significant push, and just was at the Reservation Economic Summit in July, and the Office of Small Business Programs from various agencies were there. And the first thing that was sort of on their mind is, look, to Tim's point, is we need, or we're being directed to cast a broader net and bring non-traditional actors into the marketplace, right? And so there's a lot of focus on how is the government going to achieve that, not just meeting the goals, because you can meet the goals, and we'll talk a little bit about category management. That really always irked me, because you're going to meet the goals. You're going to meet the goals with fewer and fewer companies. So the challenge is that the administration had already come out and said, look, we have to increase the goals, right? I think everybody's probably seen the proposals to increase the small disadvantaged goal, or they call it the small disadvantaged 8A goal, to 15%, right? But then there's been a discussion on the Hill, can you increase that without looking at the hub zone goal, without looking at the woman-owned small business goal, without looking at the small business goal? So one of the things I'd say, and Frank, you and I couldn't do this when we were in federal service, but we're not. One of the things that I'd say is that as an industry group, you need to sort of make your voice heard. The council does a great job, right? That if you're looking at increasing goals, don't pit one socio group against the other. Right. You gotta, the tide has to raise all groups. And so if you're looking to increase to the 15% goal, and by the way, I think 8A, if I'm not mistaken, SDB 8A usually hits 10 or 11%, right? I mean, even though the goal is 5%, it hits 10 or 11. Yeah. So meeting 15% isn't that much of a stretch, but it is from 5 to 15.
Yeah, and the other thing is this, being someone who came from operational contracting, I was operational for about the first 17 or 18 years of my career. COs, of course, I always advocate for the COs, but COs can only keep so many balls in the air at once, right? So through the OSDBUs and the chief procurement officers and the SPEs, and the program people, they select their priorities, okay? Now, if you're paying attention to 8A, or told to pay attention to 8A and pay attention to hub zone and pay attention, it's like, okay, the last point or your first point on the radar is what you're going to focus on, right? So it's going to be very difficult to focus on everything. So like I say, like John said, you've really got to get out there and advocate and push hard, because they can only do so many things at one time. And they're always like, we'll talk about category management. COs are always, well, they can do just one more thing. It's a small thing. Yeah, but those small things over the last 15 years have added up to a job this big, because that's the, that's the old mantra. Oh, it's just one more thing. It's one little thing. So it's limited as to what they can focus on. So you really have to push hard on that.
Yeah, and I guess to sort of chat about the challenges with a contracting officer is look, you have, like you said, not even just the priorities around the goals, right? So what takes precedence, right? We're going to go 8A or we're going to go up zone, and what do those goals look like? But then you have the challenges that you introduce around category management. So you have a goal every year to bring more dollars under management. So what is that going to look like? And we're going to talk a little bit about that and sort of what are the fixes, or at least what are the strategies in addressing that. I do think that, look, at least the public standpoint of the administration has been casting a broader net, bringing in non-traditional actors, ensuring that there is good oversight of the buying activities. Look, when I started managing that program, how many folks know what a procurement center representative is? Oh, okay, you guys all got to know who the PCRs are. The PCRs are SBA employees. They used to work for Frank, who used to work for me a long time ago, that oversee the buying activities and make sure that they comply with the rule of two, right? But when I was running the program, I think I started and there was 119 of them, and I thought that was like short staff. I think when you were leaving, there's like something like 70 of them, right? Or is that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, we were still way understaffed, and volume of work was more.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think there's a focus on having better oversight of the small business programs, right? The Hill is always going to talk about this. The White House is going to like it because it sounds good, right? Small business set-asides, enforcement, et cetera. You have to make sure that the focus actually ends up into some action on the Hill, right? But one of the things that I'd say is for those that didn't raise your hand for procurement center representative, a PCR is an SBA official that has oversight of every single buying activity, right? And so you want to make sure that if you're looking at an activity that you've targeted through market analysis or however targeted this activity, you want to know who that procurement center representative is. And you want to make sure that if requirements aren't getting set aside, you're engaging with that PCR to make sure that that requirement gets set aside. And if you're not getting the PCR to engage you, you'll go to the area director and see if the area director will add assistance. I think there was a question. Yes, sir.
Well, in that regard, when it comes to small businesses responding to market survey sourcing sites, we're obviously encouraged to do that, and the rule of two implies. But who makes that decision to set it aside on a various socioeconomic status? Is it the contract officer, the small business office, is it the PCR, the program office, all the above, or how's that done?
Yeah, so Frank, you can talk about it as a contracting discretionary issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, contracting wise, as when I was CPO, we had, I had a directive from the CPO of DHS to strongly encourage, work closely with my small business person to make sure that, any efforts or new efforts or renewable efforts that were coming out, that we'd set aside if we could. I mean, but it was very, when that was a while back, so it was relatively relaxed. There wasn't a lot of pressure. They wanted you to make the goals, but you didn't get hammered if you it was but it was at that level, from the CPO to the contracting staff. This is what we have to do, especially when with the GPRA, the Government Performance and Results Act, when that came out. Now I'm dating myself. That was a long time ago. But when you had metrics that had to be met, when you had measures that had to be met, then all of a sudden, of course, people started paying attention. And so it got pushed down to the CPO, to the CEOs. So it's a lot is done. And now, sometime after that, OSDBUs are also involved. So a lot of the internal stuff was done in the agency because you didn't want it to really, you didn't want to fall short and then have it then it would be visible to everybody else, right?
Right.
So you had to take care of it internally before it went anyplace.
Yeah,
basically.
and look, to a certain extent, the buying activity has discretion on which, it used to be at one point, there was some hierarchy, and you go 8A first, then HubZone, and then there was a certain hierarchy going down the chart. There is no hierarchy. It was reaffirmed as of the Small Business Jobs Act of the 2010, I think it was, that they're all even. But it is the discretion of the activity with respect to which goals are they not meeting and which ones they can focus on. But the other thing that I'll say, though, is that, Lori and Bruce sort of spoke to this earlier. There's always been, with contracting officers, a perception that the HubZone program is going to be hard, right? The HubZone program, the HubZone set-asides are going to get challenged. There's going to be a protest. Something's going to go wrong. I think the changes that the agency has made over the last several years to stabilize that program are excellent changes in encouraging contracting officers to set the requirement aside. But it is a discretionary issue with respect to meeting their goals. Now, you could do data analysis to determine which buying activities aren't meeting their HubZone goals.
Sure.
And then target those activities as a solution that can meet that goal, right? But it is discretionary. What you explained with respect to oversight, yeah, that is, Frank sort of walked through it, but it is the small business office sort of keeping accountable the activities in the contracting shops, and then ultimately looking at the goals that was established for the agency. A lot of folks don't know this, by the way. Every agency has different goals, right? Our agency, SBA, had a goal of 72% for small business spend. Department of Energy has a 10% goal. But the 5.5.3.3s are consistent across the federal government. So it'd be important to find out who's not meeting that goal through your data analysis to then sort of market to them. The last thing that I'd say is, look, the one stick that the SBA does have is the PCR. There's market research, right? And this is someplace that the administration is looking to spend more money on, right? So oversight. If there's market research and the file demonstrates that there are 2 or more small businesses that can provide it at a regional spot, and it doesn't get set aside, and you complain to the PCR can ultimately not sign the 2579. Is that what it is, 2579? It's the form that they officially have to sign. PCR cannot sign that form. That can actually elevate into a secretarial appeal. Nobody wants that to happen. You don't want to go to the administrator and say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to appeal to the Secretary of the Defense. But that does happen. And that's the stick that they have. The SBA can put an acquisition on stop until the secretarial appeal takes it all the way to the secretary. So that's why I say know your PCR. If the market research is happening, follow up with them to see why requirements aren't getting set aside. And if they're not helpful, go to the area director. But as far as a trend, look, I think we saw it through the campaign. We've seen it through the initial 6 months with respect to small business focus. There is significant focus on bringing in new entrants, increasing the challenges, addressing the challenges that category management has brought to bear on the marketplace, and trying to figure out how do we get more small businesses involved, because that's been plummeting.
Yeah, big time. Let's go ahead and move on here.
So this is sort of what we talked about with respect to the equity, racial equity and support, and the executive order. So one of the things that the president signed in right after he got into office was this executive order. And that pushed its way in a number of ways to agencies. And I think it's important to sort of focus on other things than the goal, right? So one thing obviously is the goal. Let's increase goals. However, this goes much deeper. The initiative around this was, what are internal hurdles within agency programs that prohibit participation of the underserved communities in our programs, right? So what inherent hurdles exist in these programs that make it more difficult for the underserved communities to participate in our program? So yeah, increasing the goal is great, but looking at so each agency is directed to look at the programs and identify particular hurdles to the ultimate effectiveness of that program. I'll give you an example. This sort of always irked me, even when I was running the program. Irks me a lot more that I'm outside and helping firms achieve their goals, is you're really successful, right? You have this 8A company, you grow it, it becomes really successful. You go to one of the things is you go and want to hire someone because you're a cybersecurity firm, and the agency says, oh, wait a second, you have to be the highest paid. Like, wait, what? I mean, Lockheed doesn't look at that. AECOM doesn't look at that. Why do I have to be? I want to hire the best person out there. But the government says, oh no, we'll take care of you, 8A firm. You can't hire someone who's going to take advantage of you. So that sort of maternal instinct is sort of inherent in some of the programs. And those are the things that really need to be addressed to unleash the programs. Another one is when you go to sell your company. If you're an 8A company, you can't sell your company unless it goes through the district office, to the 8A director, through Frank and I, who then make a recommendation to the administrator to sign on it to sell your company. No other program puts such restrictions on it. Right now, I get it. You don't want your 8A contract going to Lockheed Martin. Right. But if you're addressing that issue, what other types of barriers? So each agency is supposed to look at this. And this is another area that I think, as a trend, you're going to, over the next 4 years, you're going to see a reaction to this requirement where there will be looking at the programs. And I'd encourage you to make comments to it too, right? Each agency has a task force to look at this. I'd encourage you to make comments to it because you'll see, as a reaction to this executive order, guidance, changes in policy, changes in regs to address the potential barriers where the programs are creating hurdles as opposed to ladders. I don't know if there's any comments to that.
No, that's a good synopsis,
Yeah.
definitely.
Any thoughts on that?
No, I actually think you hit that pretty dead on.
Okay. So Made in America, I think I'll be real quick on this. When this initially came out, there was a lot of questions around, oh my gosh, is this a major change in policy for the government, right? And it ended up, no. It's going to be more transparency, right? So they created a Made in America office at OMB. They required that the requests be public, approvals be public. I think that's important. I know you had to deal with Made in America as a contracting officer. I think there's a significant focus on it. And quite frankly, I think the pandemic sort of highlighted the issues with the supply chain and the risks in the supply chain and Made in America and where everything was coming from. So that was sort of highlighted. I don't know how much that visibility you had into that issue while at the SBA and the federal government. But I think this particular executive order wanted to bring ultimately transparency to it. Now, the one thing that I would caution is that there is a directive for the Made in America office to look at the policies at agencies and potentially work with the FAR Council to make changes. So there could potentially be some changes, but the immediate impact has been more transparency to the Made in America exemptions, but also more transparency when they're approved and why they're approved. And then the last thing I'd say, and I didn't even know this, so even to the point, like if you go to a park service that's managed by the U.S. Federal Services, are they using products that are made in America, and do they have an exemption from that? So those are things that they're going to be looking at and a little bit more focus on. I don't think it's going to, my personal opinion, I don't think it's going to be a significant shift from existing policy, but it'll bring more transparency to that requirement. Okay. Any questions there? Yes, ma'am.
Which agency will be enforcing the Made in America?
So generally it's OMB, Office of Management and Budget, but the Office of Federal Procurement Policy sort of is responsible for managing federal policy. So OMB through OFPP, and I know we have acronyms, I apologize. Office of Management and Budget through the Office of Federal Procurement Policy.
Anyone else? Good.
So on these, I think, on the regulatory changes, I think we can, so look, tomorrow, John Klein and the regulatory team will be here. I think we're going to have a long discussion about the Mentor-Protege changes, the 8A changes, the joint venture changes. They'll go over those and we'll have some discussion for chatting about it. Frank, I know you were there when those rule changes came out. I don't know if you have particular highlights, and we can put the slides up, I think, in the next several slides. One is I just wanted to talk through this with the group with respect to changes, because you always hear, I always put this up, because you always hear, oh my gosh, something is changing, right? There's a new statute out. This is going to significantly impact me.
Right.
But those changes don't always happen right away, right? But then there's certain changes that will happen overnight, and you're like, wow, where the heck did that come from? So I think it's important to sort of understand that. Having, you've been in government for a long time, you've been in contracting for a long time. I think in my perspective, and by the way, going from outside government and going into government, I was like, oh my God, how does any of this ever actually work? No offense to the SBA folks. But some of this can take years and years and years, right? So in my mind, if you look through this, when you have the National Defense Authorization Act and you're like, wow, something changed, you're like, is this going to happen tomorrow? No, because unless it's exactly the way Congress intends it, it's going to go through the rulemaking process. And Frank, I know you've been through the rulemaking process. I'm not sure, Tim, if you've gone through the rulemaking process. The SBA guys have been through the rulemaking process. That's like, a 24, 36-month event if it's as quick as that. I mean, we started on the All Small Mentor-Protege program after the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010. The program didn't get launched until October of 2016. But the good part of it is there's a lot of interaction. There's public comment, there's roundtable, there's listening sessions, there's interagency comments, all those things. So it can take a long time. So if you see something in the law, getting that into reg and then ultimately a program launched, that can take a good number of years. I don't know if there's any thoughts to that? Your experience in that at the agency?
No, I'm with you on that because I saw things, I was at the Department of Energy back in 2006. I saw things happening now in 2020 that were just coming to fruition. We were talking about it in 2006. So, yeah, it's painful, but I mean, when you look at it, like John said, there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of input from a lot of different parties, good or bad, whatever you see that as, but, it's a necessary process, but it is painful.
Yeah, and what I'd say is, look, when we started this, and Lori and Bruce talked to this, the changes that were implemented in the Hub Zone program and the regulatory changes in stabilizing the program, those were, kudos to the agency for getting that done in a quick way. Because that really stabilized the program. It went through the regulatory process. Program office worked with Office of General Counsel, worked with industry, and got that done. But when that's sort of, so when you hear, NDAA proposals, you'll hear that tomorrow, right? Oh, it might be in the National Defense Authorization Act. Doesn't mean it's going to happen immediately. By the way, even the goal changes, when they're talking about goal changes, the administration can have an executive order that says, look, for our purposes, we're going to increase our targets to X, Y, and Z. It's in statute. So it actually has to become official and become a requirement, it'll have to go through the statutory process. And unless it gets attached, only thing these days that move are, either like recovery bills or the National Defense Authorization Act. Yeah. So unless it gets attached to one of those, it won't happen. But chances are, if it doesn't happen that way, the administration itself will say, okay, well, these are our targets, at least in the interim. So that you may see that. The other thing that I just point to, so that becomes policy, right? The one thing that I'd point to, we're going to talk about category management, my favorite subject, in a second. But the one thing that I'd point to is that, look, so you have this policy that came out. It actually came out under the Obama administration, and I'm apolitical, right? So we were adamantly against it at the agency. but it came out under the Obama administration. And category management, first it came out of strategic sourcing. Let's set up these huge vehicles and buy mass products and bring down volume, bring up volume, bring down prices, work with fewer companies, create efficiencies. Really bad, I thought. Why? Because there'll be less businesses,
Less
right?
businesses. That's what we're seeing now.
Yeah, so that didn't go through statute. That didn't go through regulation. It didn't go through public comment. That was a policy created by OMB, implemented by Office of Federal Procurement Policy, created goals for agencies, and all of a sudden you don't have any public engagement, you don't have any public comment, but you have fewer and fewer small businesses performing in the federal marketplace. The government will say, well, we met our goal. Yes, you did, but with fewer and fewer companies. So just being aware of, is it a regulatory change? Is it a statutory change? Is it a policy initiative? What I always worry about, these lower ones, you're going to have industry input. You're going to have the council comment on, et cetera. What I always am concerned about is what kind of policies are going to get implemented without public participation and public engagement. And then it just takes root. And then, after a while, it has a life of its own. Like even category management, it's like, I don't know, is the administration for it anymore? Isn't it for it? It just has a life of its own now. And there's these goals, and each year, like you said, contracting officers look at the sheet. They're like, okay, I got to meet this goal. I got to meet this goal. Easiest way is to go to a large vehicle and set it aside for small business, meet my category management goal, and meet my small business goal. So it becomes a life of its own without the public policy making, public engagement. Those are the things that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and I think, part of the good news is I've been to a couple of agencies. I've been in the intelligence community. I've seen where they've had special authorities to do things that we wouldn't look at as the best things. But a couple of those agencies I've seen will not, they don't really want to look much different than everybody else because they're afraid they're going to get a lot of scrutiny. So it's kind of like, everybody, including the press, it kind of polices everybody else. So even the people with special authorities, and I'll tell you, there are some out there that can do a lot of things that they want to do, which would most likely hurt small business, but they don't do it. And that's good. That's the good news. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, John, was that the category management something that was recommended by the Section 809 panel?
No, that's a great question. So category management was well on its way before the Section 809 panel. The Section 809 panel had some interesting recommendations that, in my mind, were also significantly detrimental to small business. The good part of that is that the Hill really pushed back and so quashed a lot of the Section 809 recommendations. But category management sort of had a life of its own. And it's come and gone. Over the years, I think there was an initiative back in the Clinton administration around strategic sourcing, and then it went away, and then it come back.
Well, the FSSI, that was, how many years ago was that? 15?
Yeah.
Maybe even more.
Yeah.
That's kind of where it started. It all began, and it's kind of snowballed since then.
Yeah. And so that's just an understanding. Any other questions on this? Because I think this is really important as sort of advocates for the programs. And then as you see, so look, as small businesses, and I've been a small business contractor, you're so busy with running your own business, right? You're not busy monitoring this stuff. You're busy if you can get to business development and pipeline and then managing your payroll and your business. But these things are important because ultimately it's, where did my contracts go? What's the shifting landscape that I sit on, and how's that being impacted? It's being impacted by all these things, and not being aware of it. And again, it's great, and I'm not saying this just because Michelle is sitting back there, but the great part of being a member of a council like this is that they have their eyes and ears out for those things and help guide and frame that discussion and comment on it to make sure that it doesn't shift without you knowing it. We can talk.
We have another question here.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question. Is anybody aware of any efforts to rectify the administration's efforts to cast a broader net and engage non-traditional contractors to rectify that with category management?
Okay, so the question was, how do you align category management with casting a broader net and bringing in new participants? In my opinion, I don't know if you guys have opinions on this. In my opinions, they're diametrically opposed. You can't have one and do the other. I mean, category management, I mean, look, so we went from strategic sourcing to category management, and that was a little bit of a better step because category management said, we're not just going to set up vehicles, we're going to share practices and create these hallways and best-in-class vehicles. But at the end of the day, it's forcing dollars into managed contracts. So at the end of the day, you have fewer and fewer participants. I think that's diametrically opposed to casting a broader net. I don't know how the two of them can really live together. There are recommendations that were made, and if we have time, we'll talk through them with respect to what do you do in a category management environment, but I don't know that they can live together. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Well, you know, the other thing is, of course, being a contracting and a program guy, the other thing I think about, and I'm honestly, I'm not a big supporter of category management, but the other thing is we've got these people in the government called contracting officers and program managers, right? And they're all very highly trained. I mean, they are. Now, we're all taxpayers in this room, too. Besides being a small business, we're taxpayers. So what we're doing with category management, we're taking discretion away from people that we pay tons of money to be professional. We're taking tons of discretion away from them. It keeps getting pulled away. And we're saying, you got to do this. You got to do a percentage of this. You have to do this. These people are supposed to be business managers. They're supposed to be able to make those decisions. So, I mean, that's, to me, I mean, when you look back in history, and I'm not a great history guy, but, you know, you look at the beginnings of public procurement and why it was done, a lot of times, you know, all these movements come up where, oh, we've found all these efficiencies, we're so efficient now. I mean, in the beginning, you could make the argument that procurement was not supposed to be efficient. That's why it never was. It was a way to dole out public monies, where priorities, national priorities, right? Absolutely. The way we want it to go out. So it's almost faulty reasoning to think, oh, we got to be more and more efficient. That's not the purpose.
Yeah.
When we're being efficient and we're hurting small business, we've lost. That's not what we're here to do, right? So
I'd have these arguments with the GSA all the time. We have to buy like industry. Be like, why do we have to buy like industry? Our taxpayers are our stockholders. Like, no. It's just what you said. Your priorities aren't to create more efficiencies. It's to dole the money out in a way that gets your mission completed,
right.
Obviously.
Right.
But it has the impacts that Congress intended them to have. Economic development impacts, right? How we spend our money. The largest buyer of goods and services in the entire world. How the government spends its money impacts the economy. And they are directed to engage small business.
Now, there's one other thing that I would add to that also. I mean, being a small business, right? Think about the whole like appeal process. Okay, do you really want to spend your time and resources going through that to try to fight against the tide? It's too big, right? There are ways to do it. In fact, Frank and John were like talking about a couple of different ways. You know, you got to talk to your PCR, like you got to know, got to all, you know, do all that stuff. But when it comes down to it, what are you looking to do? I mean, we're all in business here, right? Unless there's some government people who, you know, I mean, but like even that in business, we just have different customer sets. But if you're a small business, you want to gain market share, whatever that is, whatever your business is. I would say, I wouldn't spend an ounce of time fighting against the tide unless you have the resources and time in order to do that, and it's really worth it at the end game and you really have a shot. There's a system involved here. These policies, just like starting like the whole 15 years ago thing, like really has grown and grown and grown. That's going in a direction. It's not going the other way. Why take the time and effort and resources to fight against it? Just figure out how you can work within it. Because they still want to give you money. They still want to give you market share, right? But it might not be in the way that you necessarily had thought the first round, or the first time you get into it. But I would say make friends with the ones who are winning. That's how you do it. I mean, you just go and gain market share based on who is winning this stuff. Now, there are less small businesses winning. I don't know how we change that necessarily. I mean, actually, we are trying, because like we have software that will help the government meet the rule of 2 more often. It's things like that. But hey, who knows? I mean, like if all that would take off or any of that kind of stuff. So I would just go with the flow, because your main thing is not to change the system, but to grow your business.
So I think real quick on sort of the changes, and the legal team will go through this, and I want to jump back to category management and some recommendations on how to deal with the current trends. On the recent changes, what I'll just focus on these next slides is, look, so how many folks are familiar with the Mentor-Protege program? Okay. All the small businesses, I think there was significant improvements to the Mentor-Protege program and the joint ventures under them, right? We'll talk about that. What I would suggest as a trend, what do we see? We see that a significant number of our clients are creating mentor-protege relationships and then creating joint ventures to pursue larger and more complex contracts. So as we were talking about, there's consolidation. There's challenges on getting on the best-in-class vehicles, right? There's challenges on getting into the more complex requirements, because becoming complex, they're becoming larger. What do we see happening? A lot of the newer entrants are finding a mentor, teaming up in an MPA, creating a joint venture, and having that joint venture go after that set-aside contract. You guys all know the joint venture inherits the qualifications of both members. It inherits the size and status of the protege, of the managing member of that joint venture. So now you have 8A, hub zone, joint venture that has the qualifications of protege and mentor. Now you're becoming really competitive. That's a trend that we've seen client after client after client. So if yesterday you used to go after requirements individually, on your bids tomorrow, today, the next day, your competitors a lot of times are joint ventures. And they bring the quals of both members of that joint venture. I think so that's an important takeaway. The other important takeaway, I think that in my mind, is because the rules have sort of been simplified and streamlined, and we can talk about any of the rules if you have questions. John Klein will talk about them tomorrow. They've been simplified. Because of that, because there are more joint ventures, more joint venture awards are getting protested. So we've seen a bunch of our clients that went through that whole process of creating the joint venture, getting the win, getting protested. If that joint venture isn't set up correctly, one of the changes was you don't have to go to the district office if you're an 8A to get your joint venture approved ahead of time. You used to have to do that. Now you don't have to do it unless it's a sole source requirement. If you're a hub zone, you don't have to go get it approved anyways. You can draft your joint venture. If it doesn't meet the SBA requirements and you get protested, you can be found to be other than small. And you would have gone through 12 months, the pipeline, 12, 18, 36 months, gotten an award, gotten a protest, and lost it. And we're seeing more and more of that taking place. So the one thing that I'd say is it's a great strategy in the current environment where we're seeing consolidation, where we're seeing more complex requirements, brings that qualification to be competitive, but make sure you structure it correctly so under protest, you prevail. That's the one challenge that we've sort of identified. I don't know, with the mentor-protege rules, Frank, you were there when they launched the changes, the MPA and the JV changes. Is there anything specific you wanted to add to that?
No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
A perfect explanation of it, definitely.
And I would say that, protests in general have risen,
Yeah.
right? And like it used to be back in the day, you would never do it. Yeah, it was frowned upon, but then it sort of almost became commonplace, and it's like, and you kind of almost had to factor that into your pipeline. Yeah, it's crazy, but yeah, that's exactly right.
Any questions with respect to sort of that strategy, that teaming strategy, the mentor-protege strategy?
That's very
Joint-
strong, by
joint
the way.
ventures?
Very,
Yeah.
very strong strategy. And actually, we are seeing more and more of that. I mean, the data shows that those are winning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
How many guys? Yes, sir.
So I was on the ACT-IAC committee for Polaris, and they recommendations to GSA about how to keep small business, because they really want to get small business on that.
Yeah.
So one issue with MBA was the issue that the mentor can get 60% of the work.
Yeah.
Right? So what they're saying, what they're looking at is, unless that JV has worked together before, they're not going to accept that JV.
Yeah, so that's inconsistent with the regulations. So that needs to be pointed out. So even in CIOS P4, they tried that, right? We had a bunch of clients. We're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So we reached out to the Hill. We reached out to the SBA. SBA sort of was very helpful. They reached out, pushed back with, what was it, HHS? And they got that fixed. So if we're seeing that, that's counter to regulation. Now, they will claim, so the regs say that you have to consider past performance and qualification of both members. So the one vague area is will consider. Doesn't say you will give them equal weight. So that opens up a little bit of a door for the agency to say, oh, well, you can only have one past performance from the mentor, the rest has to come from the protege. But you cannot say that the JV itself needs to have the past performance. That is clearly counter to the regulation. And if we're seeing that, I definitely bring it up to the SBA. And they'll push back. Yeah. I think there was one more question in the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, in terms of joint venture, so let's say there is a new AD that just certified as AD.
Yeah.
Will they be able to form a joint venture with an outside company?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, the joint venture, there's two ways to joint venture. One is to create a mentor-protege relationship. And that's generally, if it's a longer-term relationship where there's going to be benefits flowing from mentor to protege, and you only get two mentors, so you want to choose carefully. But there's benefits flowing to mentor to protege. And usually the mentor is other than small, but because you have an MPA, you can do a joint venture, and that joint venture is exempted from affiliation, and therefore you can pursue set-aside contracts. You can certainly identify a mentor as a new entrant and go down that route. The other route is, I don't want a long-term relationship. There's this other small business that I'm interested in. Two small businesses can joint venture together without an MPA. Those two small businesses, whoever is the managing partner inherits, that JV inherits the designations of the managing partner. Does that make sense?
Right. So will they still benefit from the AD?
Sure. So if the 8A is the managing venture, in other words, has 51% and can demonstrate ownership and control, it inherits that designation. So yes, that JV becomes 8A small business. And that JV benefits from anything an 8A firm would benefit from. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Regarding the joint venture, is it the 2-year clock start with prime contract or prime and subcontract?
Prime. I would argue prime. That's a little bit vague, but I've had that discussion with Mr. Klein. And it's a prime federal contract. So some people will say, well, the joint venture got a contract, I don't know, with Lockheed, and it was a subcontract. Prime federal contract is my interpretation.
I'm hearing it both.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question for John Klein tomorrow, but I've asked them, it's prime federal contract is my understanding as well. Was there another question? Yes, ma'am.
When would the affiliation come into play for MPA?
So the mentor-protege relationship is exempted from affiliation. That doesn't mean they can't say, wow, there was affiliation before. So you can't have done all this stuff and try and wash it with an MPA, right? When you create the mentor-protege relationship, you will identify the benefits of the relationship flowing from the mentor to the protege. So that could be up to 40% equity. That could be, Lori, correct me if I'm wrong anywhere in these comments, but you're the official SBA person here. But that could be 40% ownership. That could be assistance in your operations. That could be creating a joint venture. Those things need to be mentioned in the MPA agreement, right? Those assistants that are mentioned in the MPA agreement are exempted from affiliation. So your joint venture is exempted from affiliation because it's part of that mentor-protege relationship. It's a 3-year program extendable to another 3 years.
And that's what the staff at SBA is looking at that mentor-protege agreement to make sure that it is genuine and robust in providing benefits to the protege.
Right.
And that it's not just a facade to be able to do joint ventures
Yeah.
as a small venture.
Any other questions? Any comments on that? The one thing I'd say, and I know the SBA folks are on the room, what I'd say is for our clients that are mentors, we're like, hey, kind of want it a little bit fuzzy, not super fuzzy, a little bit fuzzy, but have some specifics in there because SBA won't approve it unless there are specifics in there. For our clients, the protege, we're like, you want it as specific as possible. You want who's going to provide what assistance, when, how long they're going to take, what exact systems they're going to provide you, access to whom, all those things. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. The mentor is going to want to make it fluffy so they can say they're succeeding. Protege wants to make it really specific because they only get 2. And you want to make sure you get your benefits in those 2 mentors.
And we always tell the proteges that you have more power than you think.
Yeah.
In negotiating, use it as a chance to negotiate for a lot of support. Facility clearances, somebody today in the prior panel mentioned CMMS, help with CMMC,
Yeah.
great idea. Throw it all up and throw it all in there. Because you have more power than you think in negotiating. You need the relationship, but they need you too, or they won't be at the table with you.
Yeah. And there was a question about the 3-2 rule, which is, by the way, now just the 2 rule, the 2-year rule. So it used to be 3 contracts in 2 years. Now it's just a 2-year rule as soon as you receive your first contract. I think, so we can go through the mentor-protege stuff because we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah, we're getting down on
Yeah,
it now.
we're-
Actually, a little past.
A little past. You guys are okay for going a little bit longer? Okay, we'll go a little bit longer. We can go through those. Yeah, we
They can always make more of that.
We
Do
can
you want to
keep-
do the joint venture
Yeah,
changes?
no, we talked about that. I think we can go to, we talked about that. One thing that I'd say is that on the previous slide, if you can go backwards, the one thing that I'd say is that there is more focus on assigning NAICS codes at the task order level and making sure that you qualify at the task order level, especially, I shouldn't say especially, in cases where the master contract wasn't specifically set aside for that requirement. So now, if it's an 8A contract master, you can continue to get task orders under that, even though you graduate from the program or you're no longer qualified because of size or status. If it is not an 8A and they do an 8A task order, you have to qualify at the task order level. Does that make sense? That's something, that's an important thing to be aware of. Okay, I think I just wanted to talk real quick about, no, I think we're good
Yeah,
on
we
that.
kind of went over it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
No. These will be available, by the way. Nah. How many 8As do we have? Oh, okay.
Okay, we got some in the back.
If you want the slides later, they're available. Okay, so category management, and I'd like to just show the slides if we can. I think,
Oh, share? Oh, I'm sorry, you want to go back?
no. I think there's slides next coming up. You guys, how many folks know category management, are aware of the best-in-class vehicles? All right, so the one thing that I'd say is I'd just be aware of the best-in-class vehicles. And then if you have current, and we'll talk about this in a second, or there's a slide in there, maybe we won't have time to talk about it. If you have current clients in the federal government, the one thing that really, really frustrates me, and I'm sure when you were at the SBA you heard this as well, and I'm sure you see this with respect to your clients. One thing that really frustrates me is when people are surprised. They're like, oh, wait a second, I was working on this requirement. It was 8A. I've been working on it for years. My client's satisfied, and I just found out it's going to Oasis or Alliant or CIO SP4. I don't have that vehicle. So it's really, really important to make sure, I said really like 3 times. It's important to make sure that you have discussions with your client and ask the question, hey, is this at risk of going into a best-in-class vehicle or coming under category management? Because I need to create a strategy if it is, because you'll be left out in the cold. And for those guys that, these are all the different best-in-class vehicles. It covers almost every industry. And if you're not aware of those changes coming, you'll get caught off guard. Anything to add to the categories?
Well,
Yeah.
that is an excellent point. And it really, I don't think it takes much, right? It's just communicating with our customers. I mean, we all have to do it. And it's the same way that we do with our own employees and things of that nature too. It's preemptive.
Yeah.
It should be part of the standard practice.
Yeah, and that goal is going to continue to rise. So more and more stuff is going to go to category management.
Yeah, and one of the things on one of the slides, we don't have to go back to it, but I think Bloomberg did a study, and they presented here a couple of years ago. But on one of the slides, it showed that there was 84,000 definitive contracts at risk of being pulled into category management. So that's 84,000 possible contracts, right? So be aware. That's a trend that you definitely need to be aware of. I think we can go to the, so this is interesting. So what we see here is the top 35 districts, right? So imagine like the Washington, D.C. area, Norfolk, Alabama, San Diego, the top 35 government contracting districts, they've gotten a ton more money. Everybody else, kind of leveled out, right? So that is sort of directly related to, if you're in those top 35, you probably have one of those vehicles. You probably are in the know, you know what's happening, you're doing your market research, the trends you're following. If you're sort of, out in the hinterlands and, not necessarily engaged and don't have those vehicles, you're kind of just trudging along. All that spend that we saw that went up over the last few years, it's going to the top 35 districts. I think the next slide is also interesting. Here's the federal supplier base, which comes out of the SBA website also. So if you see the number of small businesses engaged in federal contracting, and this means just getting one contract, right, is continuously going down year on end. And, I would argue, I don't know if you guys have a different opinion, I would argue it's significantly due to category management. There may be some issues around, CMMC and some of the schedule buying and others, but I mean, in my mind, I think it's directly sort of correlates with category management and the goals there.
Yeah, and I always go back to the requirement, we want more and more people certified. I mean, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? Because the base is getting smaller. In the meantime, you're certifying more and more firms.
Yeah.
So that doesn't connect. It's not going to connect. So
Anything on there?
No, it's just that it's something to
Be aware of.
More than just even keep an eye on, to be proactive about,
Yeah.
knowing that this is how the trend is going. What can small businesses do to make sure that you don't fall into that category? I mean, you got to think about that, and that's really where it comes down to strategy. We have a question over here.
Oh, yeah.
I think, you gotta know this, I'm sure the issue is the expense, right, ISO 9001, ISO 20000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
CMMC, CMMI, level 2 or level 3 services are better. And for small businesses, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to get those.
That's true.
Maintain them on a yearly basis now, ISO, CMMI, level 2 or 3, version 2. It's annual. You're talking $50,000 a year just to maintain those.
Yeah.
That's prohibitive for small businesses.
Yeah, and that's why sort of one of the trends that we're seeing that we talked about, and I don't know if I significantly focused on it, there is a significant push. So because of category management, because of all the requirements that you just mentioned, because of consolidation and because of more complex requirements, there's been a significant push for strong subcontracting plans on contracts, right? And then oversight with respect to subcontracting. The challenge is, I think, with the data side, you'll appreciate this, and you were responsible for this program as well. The challenge is that the data system around subcontracting is sort of a black box. ESRS, not like FPDS or SAM, so it's not publicly available. Keeping transparency and accountability to the prime contractor level is a significant challenge. I know you have your commercial market representatives that do audits, but there's 70 PCRs, I think there's 5 CMRs.
Yeah.
And then you have DCMA that does some audits, but there's more of a trend to say, okay, we're not going to be able to achieve small business participation at the prime contract level because of all these things. So let's push it at the subcontract level. But we need real strong subcontracting plans, and then we need real strong accountability of the prime contractors on those subcontracting plans. And the data systems, I don't know what your thoughts are on the data systems, but they don't, as far as I know, they don't exist very, very well on subcontracting.
No, and the last number that I looked at, there were like 443,000 contracts that had a designation for a requirement for a subcontracting plan of some sort. And only about, I think it was less than 10% of that data gets reported to USA Spending, which is our only source when it comes down to it, because none of us have access into the broad spectrum of the ESRS.
That's
right?
not publicly available.
So it's hard. It's even hard to tell, because I mean that's one of the data sources that we pull is USA Spending, but it's just not complete. And so how in the world do you keep
anybody accountable?
How? Yeah.
Right. So I think the next slide is also, so this is the new entrants that we were talking about. And it's not entrants that Tim was mentioning, sort of people coming into the federal marketplace and registering to do work with the federal government. That's going up. Them receiving contracts as a new entrant is going significantly down. So someone coming into the marketplace and getting a contract is a significant, and I think you're absolutely right. It's category management, but it's also the other barriers with respect to participation as a prime contractor. Yeah.
Yeah, and the support programs that are put in place to try to help these companies, like the PTACs and all of that, kind of stuff. Like, I know a couple of PTACs that have closed because their funding has gone down, right? Small business offices within any of the agencies that you guys are targeting, small business offices are historically undermanned, right? It's like it's not a lot of investment that goes. Even on the prime contractor side, they have small business offices too, large primes, but even that they're not huge offices. You know what I mean? So So the resources to help these new entrants even come into the system and like do better, I'm not going to say that they're all necessarily dwindling, but they're not necessarily going up.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. So when we talk about as a trend, the administration saying that they're going to have stricter oversight, they're going to push down these requirements to subcontractors, et cetera. That's not going to happen, but for better systems, which you mentioned initially, and additional resources.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I'd say is advocates for these programs, oftentimes we advocate for policy, right? We say, oh, we want the program simplified, we want quicker certifications, we want better and easier set-asides. One of the things that I would encourage the different associations to look at is advocating for additional resources to the agencies.
Right.
Everybody loves to talk about small business when they're running for office. Not so much once they get into office. It's like, small business, what? I mean, it used to be, and I don't know if you guys talked about this, but when I was at the agency, we always used to say the Department of Defense spends in one day what our annual budget is, right? So the SBA's budget is one day of the DoD's budget. And if small business is that important, why isn't it?
Yeah.
Why is it that way? Yeah, amen. So, okay, I think real quick if we can go through sort of the, this is a good one because you can also see, so where did the contracts go? So this was another Bloomberg analysis. Oh.
I actually have another appointment. I have to go run.
Yeah.
You have clicker? Okay.
We're going way too long, huh?
Okay. No, well, I just have to,
Our panelist is leaving. You guys, if you're done, tell me. We'll stop.
I'm so sorry. I have a thing
That's
to go
okay.
to. Okay.
So real quick.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
What's that?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll be real quick. I think one of the things is that, look, there was a Bloomberg analysis that said 138,000 contracts were reduced. 47% of them came from large contractors. 53% of them were small business contracts. So again, the brunt, even though it's close, but the brunt of it went to small business.
Yeah, but you also have to ask the question, okay, why? In a longer discussion, let's talk about what are duplicative contracts, and is it just a program priority, or what's the deal? What's the definition? Good or bad?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. But small business contracts disappeared.
Yeah.
Large did too. But okay, so sort of the best practices. Frank, I don't know what your thoughts are on this. One of the things that we always focused on was, look, if you're going to have category management, if you're going to have best-in-class vehicles, you got to have on and off ramps, right? Because you have a few golden ticket holders that all of a sudden get tons of task orders and contracts. There should be an off ramp. Maybe don't throw them out of the contract, put them on the full and open one, right? There's got to be an off ramp. That should create a new set of on ramps,
Yeah,
right?
a lot of times we're great with on ramps, but the off ramps don't happen. So all of a sudden you get thousands of vendors, and a small percentage get awards.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and then obviously have the swim different small business tracks, like the just small business, but also the swim lanes, so you can meet all your goals, right? Hub zones, service disabled, women-owned, et cetera. There should be, so look, this last rule change made it more difficult to a certain extent, but definitely more transparent with respect to consolidation and bundling. So if an agency is taking requirements and putting them together and saying, yeah, that's a new requirement, don't worry about where we're putting this, it's new, it was never in the 8A program, or it wasn't small business, there's got to be reporting requirements, and they should be held accountable. Again, the PCR should be engaged. Rule of 2 is always very important and needs to be enforced, and it's enforced by the PCR. And then the last thing that I would say, and I'll just throw it out there, I know you guys are hub zone and some 8A. Obviously, 8A sole source is sometimes the easy button. They should take advantage of that to the extent that they think it's easier to put it on a vehicle. That's important. And then a lot of folks don't realize that the SBIR program. So if you're creating innovation and being funded by the federal government to create that innovation, so we have some clients that are 8A and receive SBIR awards. A lot of folks don't know the federal government has authority once you create that innovation. It doesn't have to be a product. It can be a process or a system. They can sole source that requirement, even if you're not an 8A. The same sole source provision, I shouldn't say the same, similar direct awards if you were funded under an SBIR phase 1 or 2, if your product is developed. So if you have innovation, I definitely look at the SBIR program as a source of funding, but then also as a source of selling back to the government. Any questions? That's what I say. That would require statutory change, right? And so, yes, look, one of the things, by the way, that's a good point, and then I'll stop talking, I promise. One of the things that was being considered during the pandemic was allowing, so the federal government needed the easy button, right? They needed to get PPE, they needed to get services, all sorts of things quickly. 8A sole source was the easy button. There was a discussion with, on a temporary basis, whenever we face a disaster, all the socio categories should have the easy button. Because then the federal government has access to the best of the best, but then the economic impact during a disaster is spread broadly as well. So if we're going to advocate for something, if we can't advocate, because some will say, look, the 8A program is a 9-year business development program, and you don't benefit from sole source for unlimited amount of time, indefinitely. All those other programs can be indefinite. You can be a hub zone forever, you can be a woman-owned small business forever, et cetera. 8A, 9-year program, that's why it's sole source. But in the case of a disaster or a national emergency, we should have the easy button for everybody. At least that's my opinion. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I agree.
Or we could make it 9 years, then it goes up.
Yeah. Yeah. So any questions? Comments? I appreciate you guys staying with us. I know there's drinks out there.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.